Hello everybody, welcome to our virtual 67 Pall Mall. Today we're very pleased to welcome back our old regular Bordeaux correspondent, the decanter correspondent, Jane Anson. Tonight Jane will be talking about Pauillac and specifically looking at 5 different estates in Pauillac and tasting 5 different wines from the tremendous 1996 vintage. So please do chat away on the side, show us what you're drinking and put your photos on social media with hashtag 67FromHome. As usual, at the end, we'll have 15 minutes to ask questions to Jane, and I'm sure we're going to do a poll as well to see which is your favourite wine. So hello, Jane, how are you?
Hey, I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Are you back in a lockdown kind of situation in France now?
So, same with you guys, I think, in London, is that right?
Yeah.
So we have potential lockdown till the 2nd of December, which I think is the same in London.
Same as us, yeah.
I think what that means is we have to make sure that all of our tastings now are really kind of warm, friendly, make everybody happy, make everybody relaxed, and enjoy some great wines together.
Absolutely. Well, lovely to see you, Jane, and I will let you carry on with telling us about Pauillac.
Thank you.
One of the most famous wine villages in the world, but not very exciting, is it? It's quite a dull place.
You definitely want to go out there on a Saturday night. That is.
Yeah. Sure. All right. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you. Speak to you in a minute. Okay. So hi, everybody. And yeah, please do tell me where you are and tell me what stage of lockdown you're all in. So we started a few days earlier than you if you're in England. So yeah, so I'm a week down so far. All going well, and I'm very happy to be tasting these delicious wines with you. And as Ronan said, we have 5 Pauillacs here. Even though this is a deep dive into Pauillac, I picked 5 Pauillacs, and I picked one that is from just a little bit further up the Medoc, which is Sauciando Mallet. And the reason I picked it is because I wanted to test with us all together what we think of it. It's always described as being as good as classified growths. It's always described as being, as powerful, and it has certainly an awful lot in common with Pauillac. And in terms of the soils that it's on, it's actually also very similar to Pauillac. It's on those kind of gravel outcrops that you get across much of the Medoc. So I'm super excited. We're all going to test it and see what we think. And at the end, obviously, we will, as usual, do a poll to see what works. Wow, okay, great. We've got lots of people from London, West Yorkshire. Wonderful. Somebody from Seattle. Hello, Seattle. And yeah, I think we couldn't be having better wines. It's dark outside for us, and hopefully in Seattle you've got nice weather. It's dark outside. It's midway through November. What more do you want but a bit of great Pauillac? And this 1996 vintage, one of those mythical vintages from the 1990s, was quite kind of tough at first, lots of big tannins, and one of those classic Medoc vintages, a lot of big tannins, not particularly welcoming at first, but has grown into being one of the legends. So let's see how it does. So what I'd like you all to do, those of you who do have the samples, before we start tasting them, I'd like you to stand up and have a look at them. If you've got them, kind of look down at them to see the color. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing. And before we even start, let me know which ones you think are the darkest in color, because we're now 1996 to 2020. They're 24, nearly 25 years old, and what we want, Alistair will wait. And what I want to see is which ones have maintained their colour the best, and does that correspond when we're tasting them to which ones have actually held their power the most, which ones have held their fruit the most. So from me, as I'm looking at them, I agree. 6 to me looks, so I would say 6 is probably the darkest. 3, the Pichon Comtesse, interestingly, not the Pichon Baron, also very dark. And probably, I think the Sauciando Mallet is the other one, which looks the darkest. So I'm going to just put a little star by them on my tasting sheet. Do the same thing, everybody, and we'll see if that, yep, I agree. One is quite surprisingly dark, I think. So let's see if that corresponds at the end of the tasting to the ones that have maintained their youth and have maintained the, the kind of the feel of fresh fruit. Okay, so Ronan, before we get going any further, could you just pull up the map of Pauillac? Thank you. Okay, so I have gone today, rather than plugging my Inside Bordeaux maps, which I know I normally do, what I have decided to do for Pauillac is just stick to the classic. This is the map which you get from the Union de Grand Cru. So this is like your standard Bordeaux map, which we have for each appellation. And what I just want to show you is how big Pauillac is. It covers 2 main communes, and you've got the river on the right-hand side, just like all of those, main appellations in the Medoc, those main Margaux, Pauillac, Saint-Julien, and Saint-Estèphe, all kind of along this strip of river. And of the wines that we're tasting today, you can see here Pichon Baron and Pichon Comtesse at the lower edges of Pauillac, as you're basically coming up from Saint-Julien. In between Saint-Julien and Pauillac, there's I would just say no man's land for the sake of argument, but actually there's lots of great estates and Au Medoc. But as you come up to Pauillac itself, you have Le Tour, which is just below Pichon Longueville. They haven't deigned to be on this map, but they are just literally directly below Pichon Longueville. And then you have Pichon Baron opposite. And then as you go further up, if you look kind of halfway up Pauillac, you get to Lynch-Barge. You can see that one. Thank you very much. Excellent work there from, I think, probably from Ronan. So Lynch-Barge halfway along, and then keep going further up. And I'm afraid we don't have Lafitte Rothschild down here, all the way up, up to where you see Mouton, exactly. And so Lafitte isn't mentioned, but you can see Mouton, and Lafitte is just above, very close to where Ronan is doing that excellent work with his little arrow. And then, have I missed any of them? No. And then, what we haven't got on this map, if you went further north, you would get to Saint-Estèphe, and then further north again, just above Saint-Estèphe, you get to a place called Saint-Seurin de Cadouan, I think that's how I say it, and that is where you will find our first wine, Sauciane de Mallet. Okay, so thank you very much. We can lose the map. Excellent. Okay, let me make sure I've got the chat back on. Okay, brilliant. So yeah, I'm going to actually, before I talk about Pauillac, I think we'll start with talking about Sauciane de Mallet, except to say, as Ronan says, Pauillac is easily one of the most famous wine villages in the world. What gives it a run for its money? Pomerol, Margaux, that's really it. Those are really, if you're thinking of famous wine villages, certainly in Bordeaux, those are the 3 which pretty much everybody knows. It is a distinctly unenjoyable place to spend a lot of time in if you're not drinking the wines, because really very few people live there anymore. It was over the years a very important port. There's still an attractive waterfront, and in fact, the most beautiful view I've ever had of Pauillac is when I came by boat. I took a boat up from the central Bordeaux up to Pauillac. And when you see the waterfront from the river, it's absolutely gorgeous. You realize that there's still an awful lot of lovely old buildings. But when you get there by car, you're really going through a lot of pretty unattractive, there's a lot of supermarkets and that kind of stuff on the outskirts. And then the actual waterfront itself, there's not that much life there anymore, although they've done a much better job in the last 5 years of renovating it and trying to make it look more beautiful again. So not the best place to go, but certainly home to some of the most expensive, most rare, most sought after wines in the world. Pauillac has 54 winemakers, so not that many winemakers. It's about 7.5% of the whole of the Medoc vineyard. And the thing that's maybe interesting in terms of what we're tasting tonight is you saw that we're tasting 1 from the northern part of Pauillac, 3 from the southern part, 1 from the middle, and then we go up and have 1 from Au Medoc. So I'm trying to show you a little bit about the different types of soil that you're going to find in Pauillac, because although it is one appellation, a very, very well-known appellation, in fact, when you start digging down and looking into Pauillac, there's really quite a lot of differences to see. You have the gravel that you'll find all over the Medoc. You have also a bit of clay, some sandy clay, and even some limestone. And all of those things have an impact that we will be looking at as we go through. Thank you very much, Peter, Jane, and Ronan's books. Ronan, I hope you're reading that as well. Very, very nice. Thank you. Okay, so Pauillac. We have one wine here that is not a classified growth, which is Saucian de Mallet, which is not in Pauillac. But within Pauillac itself, you have 18 classified growths, which really tells you, there's a lot of brilliant wines here. And not only are there 18 classified growths in Pauillac, but there are 3 first growths, the most of any appellation. And then as you go down, you've got 2 second growths, both of which we're having tonight. So this is a pretty exciting tasting. We've got 2 first growths, 2 second growths, and then you also have one fourth growth and then 12 fifth growths. So an awful lot of fifth growths. The most of any appellation of fifth growths are here in Pauillac. And we're having one of those, Lynch-Barge, which, as you all know, is a fifth growth which really could be a second, could be certainly higher. Wine et Mouton. I just had to pick to make sure I wasn't, I was giving you different, as I say, different soil types, different character. I wanted to make sure. So I think you're going to be satisfied. I really think you're going to be happy. And the Latour and the Lafite had quite different expressions. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how they're doing. Okay, we're going to dig in. Let's go. Saucian de Mallet. Good. I'm very happy that you prefer the Lafite. Okay. Why did I pick this one? So I talked about the gravel terraces. You have 2 main gravel terraces in Pauillac. There's terrace 3 and terrace 4. Now there are 6 terraces in total. We're not going to go too deeply into what they are, but the point is each of these terraces that are named 1 to 6 are at different heights. They have different width of gravel, and they kind of run perpendicular to the river. And 3 and 4 are the 2 key quality terraces. You'll find all of the 1855 growths, and I do mean all of the 1855 growths, are on either terrace 3 or terrace 4, and you find it appearing over and over again throughout the Medoc. And what's really interesting about Saucian de Mallet is it's the part where this gravel terrace rises up again, and it's the terrace 4, it's T4. So it really exactly the same type of terrace that you find in Pauillac. But it's quite a long way up. Really, it's, as I say, it's above Santa Steph. In 1855, people weren't taking a lot of notice of estates that were that far up. They didn't have the same market as the ones did that were closer to Bordeaux, and anyway, it didn't exist in the way that it is today. This is an estate which really only got going in the 20th century, and has been really known, particularly at this time. I would say 1990 to 2010 was the time when this particular estate, Saucian de Mallet, was becoming better and better known and better recognised. As I say, I picked 1996 because it's a fantastic estate, fantastic vintage for the left bank. It was a long, slow ripening. They had a pretty good, pretty rainy start, then a very good flowering and early summer. And then you had dry but cool August and September. So you had to be patient, you had to wait. There were big tannins, and no doubt bigger tannins than the same conditions would come today, because people could handle it better. At the time, they really were just waiting until it ripened. And what it meant was, at the beginning, you had some pretty hard tannins, but it really suited estates which liked Cabernet Sauvignon, which worked with Cabernet Sauvignon, and which did a good job. So this one, wow, this is pretty fresh already on the nose. Very nice. Okay, so the guy who owns this, Jean Gautreau, he arrived here in 1969, and he actually did 50 vintages and just died in November of 2019. I think he was 92. So he had done 50 vintages, and really this estate is his. Still, the imprint of what he created here will last for generations. When he arrived, he only bought 5 hectares. He was born in the Medoc. I think he was born in Le Spa, and he was got to Roland Garros, the French French Open tennis. He got to Roland Garros when he was 18 years old, all the way to the semi-finals. And he was not from a wine family, but he was from the Medoc, and he became a wine broker, and then eventually a negociant. And when he had enough money to buy a small property. He bought 5 hectares of land up in this area, and then he slowly increased it, built it up, and created something which was recognized as being particularly interesting. And when you look underground and you look at the maps, you realize why. It's on this fantastic T4 terrace. Okay, blend of this wine: 48 Cabernet Sauvignon, 47 Merlot, and 5 Cabernet Franc. When this came out in 1996 or 1997 for the en primeur, it was recognized as being better than many of the classified growths across the Medoc. So let's see how it does. Okay, so we are starting with the number 1, the Sociando Mallet, which the tasting sheet says Pauillac, but as you all know, it's Au Medoc. Okay, so you cannot say that this isn't in tertiary phase. It's definitely at that point where you get tobacco, you get wood smoke, and you get really, really, really kind of soft truffle. It feels very welcoming, feels very open. This is not in any way over. You know, that is a wine which has a lot of lovely fruit still, but it is brambled fruit. We're kind of autumnal, we're hedgerow. I really quite strongly get the kind of campfire ash. So for me, this tastes like a very, very beautiful older Medoc. And I would have no question, if I had to guess which appellation it was from, Pauillac would definitely be one of the appellations that I would be narrowing it down to, because you can feel that tannic hold. And so if we remember that the colour, as we were looking at the colour, and it was deeper than quite a few of the other ones in this lineup, I think that actually is well reflected in the fact that we still have a firm tannic hold here, and we still have a lot of delicious, delicious fruits, but it is gentle. This isn't a hugely powerful wine now. It's at that stage where it's just really, really evolving. So as I say, this is a gravel terrace. And what's interesting about this gravel terrace, and it's T4, it's the same gravel terrace as Latour is on. And what that means is that you have good gravel, maybe 2 to 3 meters of gravel, and then you get to a clay subsoil. So this has some limestone underneath that, but you have limestone, then clay, and then gravel. So you get this kind of, you know, rich power with the clay against this wonderful draining and kind of complexity that you get with the gravel. And that is really holding up nicely. I'm actually really, really pleased. This is, of all of the wines that I chose for tonight, this was the one that I know least in this vintage. So I wasn't sure, but I wanted to, you know, see. I really wanted us all together to see if this wine can hold up to what people say, which is that it's one of the best value wines to buy in the Medoc. So tell me guys what you think of it. So today, his daughter, Sylvie, is running the estate. As I say, he just died 1 year ago. And he's very well known for being very, very proud of what he'd done. Never joined the Cru Bourgeois, you know, never wanted any outside, well, the word is plaudits, other than, I could not agree more. That is an open fire and a leather armchair kind of a wine. I really think that's a wine that you could enjoy and recommend to people, and that you can say it has those tannins that could stand up against a Pauillac, and it has plenty of cassis, plenty of dark fruit. So I would say that for me gets the tick of approval that Sociando Mallet has held up to. The fact that it's being put up against Pauillac. So we'll see how it does against the others, but it has not let itself down. So, okay, good for Sociando Mallet, and I'm very happy to see that in light of what I was hoping to achieve. Okay, second one, Lynch Barge. So what have I done for the rest of them? For the rest of these, I've picked 5 absolute classic Pauillacs. And when you look back over tasting notes of these wines, and you look back at, you know, what people have said generally about these estates over the years, there's not a single one out of here that hasn't been called classic Pauillac, linchpin of Pauillac, backbone of Pauillac. You know, these are really showing the best of what Pauillac can do. So I'm really hoping that these are all going to live up to what we hope. But something really interesting as well that I picked, and the reason that I picked these two, is Lynch Barge in 1996, which is our next wine, and Pichon Baron in 1996, which is our wine 4, were both at this time being run by Jean-Michel Caz. So Pichon Baron was owned by Axel Millésimes. Lynch Barge was owned by the Caz family, but he was the director at the time of Axel Millésimes, as well as running his own property. So I think that's going to be quite interesting for us to taste those two and to see how they're doing, see if we can see any similarities, because you've got the same guy at the top of both of them. So the other people that we've got quite a few characters at the time here. We'll talk about them as we go through, but it's definitely interesting to think of Pauillac at the time, because now the land values in Pauillac are 2 million, 3 million per hectare. It's incredibly difficult now to get a foothold in Pauillac. In fact, it's quite interesting. I told you there are 58 winemakers. Even today, there are about 20 winemakers in Pauillac who give their fruit to the cooperative cellar. This is one of the few of the big appellations that has a cooperative cellar. So most of the people are independent, bottling themselves, but you still have quite a lot of smaller guys in Pauillac, but who can't afford to have a winery and to make their own wine. They take the fruit to the cooperative cellar. Okay, so Lynch Barge, owned, as I say, by the Caz family since 1939. Now, I've just brought this over to me, and just having it next to me here, what I'm seeing is a real vibrancy. The colour is gorgeous. This is a deep plum with slight edging of tobacco. But even though this is a little bit lighter than the Sociando was, I'm getting very little the core is still pretty deep. You've just got this lovely little gentle ruby brick around the outside. Wow, this is really a more pronounced tobacco, some cigar box. Again, this black truffle, but not quite as much, I think, as in the Sociando. This is really beautiful. This is very aromatic. I get a ton of complex aromas coming out of that nose. It's smoky. I get smoky oak, so we had tobacco. Again, this woods, this kind of campfire, a little bit of tar even. Very good. This is 13%. So I didn't actually talk about alcohols, but we're in 1996. We're a good 25 years ago. This is all extremely balanced. Nothing here goes above 13%. The first one was 12.5, and everything else is at 13. Yeah, smoking cigar. I mean, that really does feel. You really are. We're back here by the fire with a leather armchair. It's fantastic. Okay, so blend. 79% Cabernet Sauvignon, 13% Merlot, 6% Cabernet Franc, and 2% Petit Verdot. So a little tiny touch of spice from that Petit Verdot. The price, I didn't ask actually for the Socian de Mallet, I didn't look even, sorry. Somebody wants to quickly look and see how much Socian de Mallet is for a case, but the Lynch Barge, if you're buying this today, you'll be looking at about 1,500 for a case in bond in the UK. I looked at it on the Berry's website an hour ago, and that's what I could find. At the time, in 1996, if you want to all feel really kind of depressed, you could have bought this wine for 25 euros. That was the ex-chateau price in 1996, 25 euros 15. And 1996 was recognized at the time for being a very good vintage. And in fact, they had a great en primeur. The merchants were very happy. Prices went up from 1995. Not hugely, because these aren't huge numbers at the time, but it had gone up in price from 1995, and it was priced to recognize that it was quality. Wait till we get to the first growths and I tell you how much they were. It's cool, so very painful. But anyway, yes, so this was 25 at the time. Today you're looking at 1,500 a case. Thank you. Socian de Mallet, okay, so 684 for a case, so half the price. And well, this is delicious. but that you can do a lot worse than buying a case of Saucier de Melay 1996 for that, that's for sure. I have no commercial foot in the game for that. That is so smooth, wow. So on the palate, I get slightly sweeter fruit. So I really get quite sweet blackberry. And there's a question about, is it near its peak? When a fruit starts to go, you know, that kind of edge of slight sweetness like that, we're definitely getting to the plateau of where that wine is. I don't think it's got much more to open, but remember we're in Pauillac. Pauillac has the freshness from being close to the river. It has the freshness from Cabernet Sauvignon. Did I give you the blend? This is 79% Cabernet Sauvignon. That's high cab. Only 13% Merlot, 6 Cabernet Franc, 2 Petit Verdot. I did, now I think about it, I did give it you. But anyway, that is, you get the freshness from the Cabernet Sauvignon and the tannins and the backbone. This will stay at this peak, but it is on the plateau. This is not opening further. We're on the plateau here with Lynchbage, but it's going to keep on going, because we're also still getting, alongside that tobacco, we're getting graphite, you know, we're getting even the kind of pencil lead that you look for in Pauillac. And I could not agree more. Where else could you be in the world but in Pauillac with this wine? It's gorgeous. Love it. Okay, so Jean-Michel Caz, who, as I say, was heading this up at the time, he stayed working at AXA as well until 2000. And that tells you that these guys weren't making a fortune from their wines at the time. So even though Jean-Michel had his own property, the sizable property in Pauillac, and already by this point, one of the most famous names in Pauillac, you weren't making the kind of money that they make today. And so he kept his day job working at AXA Millésimes, working with Pichon Baron. But by 2000, it became clear that he couldn't keep doing both. He retired from Pichon Baron, at which point Christian Seeley arrived, who is still there today, and a very famous, wonderful character, and made a huge and brilliant difference to Pichon Baron since he arrived. But in the 90s, it wasn't seen as unusual to have somebody of the stature of Jean-Michel to be kind of working two competing estates, one family estate plus AXA. So really quite interesting in terms of the politics at the time. His son Jean-Charles took over in 2006. So this was 10 years from Jean-Michel handing over to his son. The other thing I love about that is that it has a real slate juice finish. It really, so when I say slate, I like to think about the texture of a wine. And with slate, I'll only use it if I think that it is slowing down your progress through the palate. So if a wine has got enough texture to hang on to so that it grips and it keeps you there, for me, slate kind of sums that up. And I get that very much with this. It's not going anywhere. When I'm talking to you, I've still got the most beautiful, delicate, fresh cassis, but also this kind of fresh menthol feel. So that must be Pichon Comtesse de Lalonde that we're getting here. Thank you very much. Yes, Pichon Comtesse is an expensive wine, and okay, you're right. It's 7:30. I better move on. But I'm sure you all agree with me. We could sit with that Lynchbage for a long time, and it would keep on giving us something new. That is beautiful. I think we're going to find this one of the hardest, in terms of the poll at the end of the tasting, one of the hardest to call. That was fantastic. Okay, so Pichon Longueville, Pichon Baron, Pichon Comtesse, Pichon Baron. Again, I wanted to pick these two because I really wanted to make this special, and I didn't even know we were going to be in lockdown, but I'm so happy I did, because let's picture that map. Let's picture that we're driving up into Pauillac. We've gone past La Tour on our right, and then you get to one of the most beautiful kind of views in Bordeaux, and also the most beautiful double view, doesn't matter which way you look. Over here on your right-hand side, if we're driving up from the south, you've got Pichon Comtesse, this very, very beautiful estate from the mid 19th century. Gorgeous, gentle turrets, gorgeous gardens in front of it. Very, very beautiful property. And then directly opposite, you have Pichon Baron, probably the most photographed of all properties in Bordeaux, except for Margaux, which again, 19th century, again, turrets, but a slightly more kind of fairy tale castle feel to it. And they are sisters in terms of sister and brother in terms of their history. And in fact, only legally separated in 1906, which is quite amazing because they were made in separate properties and run by separate people since 1860. But the final legal split came in 1906 or 1908, but anyway, in the 1910s. Sorry, in the 1900s. Anyway, this point, 1996, you had Axel Melusine and Jean-Michel at Pichon Baron, and you had May Eliane de Lencasson at Pichon Comtesse, whose family had been there for many decades, but who herself really made a huge imprint on the property and was making brilliant wines. And this particular wine, Pichon Comtesse 1996, seen very much as a wine of the vintage at the time. In fact, seen to do better than Pichon Baron at the time. I'm really interested to see how this does. And I picked this one to go first because I wanted to give Pichon Baron as much chance as I could to really see, has it grown into itself? Is it doing it as well as, you know, as it can do, as we know it can now? So let's see. Wow. Okay. So you got 2,400, me too. I found 2,450 for a case in Bond. This was very much seen as a wine of the vintage at the time. It's 74 hectares. We found it was one of the darkest of the colours, but I've got slightly less brilliance in the colour for my particular bottle. Remember, we won't all have the same bottles, and these have got some age on them. For me, the Lynch Barge had a better brilliance. Okay, let's see. Clearly, there is an awful lot of matière, as the French say. There's an awful lot here. There's, you know, this is still a wine with depth, and I think you're right, actually, with a lot of life, and it may not yet be at its peak in the way that the Lynch Barge was. Okay, so I get clear cedar, maybe more cedar than I've had in the other two so far. It's very intense. I get a lot of dense spiced blackberry. We have a Petit Verdot here. Let me tell you. Oh no, we have no Petit Verdot here. We've got Cabernet Franc. Okay, so we're getting that kind of a spice, that kind of white pepper spice. This is 75% Cabernet Sauvignon, 15% Merlot, and 5% Cabernet Franc. 75 Cabernet Sauvignon. So again, you know, we're heavy cabs in all of these. Pauillac as a whole is 62% Cabernet Sauvignon. So if you look at the plantings of the whole of Pauillac, it's 62% Cabernet Sauvignon. But in these classified estates, you almost always find that the cab is higher. And that is, again, at least partly because the gravel that is in their soils. Oh, good. If I'm missing 5%, I'm telling you it's Petit Verdot. Good, I must just have not got that bit. So there must be, because I'm sure they have Petit Verdot in the fields here. Okay, thank you. I'm sure that's where that's gone. They made 50% first wine. So at this point in the 1990s, you're starting to see better selection. You're starting to see winemaking that takes into account the second wine, the need to ensure that they're keeping the first wine as concentrated and intense and quality as possible. And so, yeah, this is 50% Pichon Comtesse. There's clear tannins, absolutely no doubt about it. This is what I quite like about the fact that this is at that stage of evolution where you're starting to see a slight breakdown in colour, which means you're starting to see those tannins just coming apart a little more than they were at first. And it's powerful. This is still pretty young. I would say that we have another 5 to 10 years before it reaches its peak, and then it's going to stay on that level for another couple of decades. But it is, I have tasted better examples of this particular vintage personally, but we've all got different bottles, so you might be having a slightly better one than I am. It's gorgeous, there's no question. But I just get, yeah, for me, it's just a tiny bit more evolved than I was expecting it to be. But very, very sweet, beautiful, dense, rich fruits, gorgeous blackberries. This is definitely a beautiful, beautiful wine. Now, why is this different? So we're at the southern part of the meadow of Pauillac here. So what we have is the gravel, but you also have sandy gravel here, and you have a very iron-rich clay subsoil, which is not dissimilar to Latour. You have a similar kind of feel. It's not quite as sticky clay as Latour, but you're right next door, and you have a lot of this kind of clay underneath as well. Beautiful. Okay, and we're going to keep that as we go to the Pichon Baron. Let's go between them. Yep, I think it is really closed compared to the Lynch, I agree, which means, as I say, you've probably got another 5 to 10 years before it really reaches it. And, you know, I think that my bottle really has a bit too much deposit in, because now I've gone to the Pichon Baron, I'm back to this real sparkling brilliance that I had with the Lynch Barge. So I would chalk that up to just, you know, that's what happens with older wines. You don't always get the perfect bottle, because back to this Pichon Baron, this is a gorgeous, sparkling, beautiful color, feels fantastic, looks fantastic. Okay, so how's Jean-Michel done? Put your nose straight over that Pichon Baron, and we're back to Cassie's, Brambles, Pencil Lead. Here I'm right back to Pauillac. Now this was a little bit difficult for a long time. I think that's why it was really not seen as being as good as Pichon Contest for a long time, because it was a bit burly and a bit kind of difficult to read for at least the first 15 years. It's really starting to kind of come into its own. And in fact, here, for the first time, I get Crème de Cassis, quite a strong black Crème de Cassis. See if you guys agree. Now, an interesting time for Pichon Baron. You had Jean-Michel leaving in 4 years' time, but you also had the same guy, the winemaker, technical director, who is here today, Jean-René Matignon, if any of you have been there. Wonderful, wonderful guy. He'd been at the estate since 1985, so he'd been there for 10 years at this point. So you had a team, Jean-Michel had also been there for about the same time, so you had a team that really worked well together and knew what they were doing, but they were held back by the winery, which was very, very old-fashioned. When it was bought by AXA, they needed huge investment at Pichon Baron, and the wines in the 70s and really for quite a lot of the 80s were quite significantly below contest and really needed work. And in this year, in 10 years before, in 1986, they held a competition, an architectural competition, asking for people to design a new winery. And that's why, by this point in the mid-1990s, they'd started to get the real impact of having better tools. So they had these fantastic soils. This is, again, gravel over clay, a lot of power. You find it in today's Pichon Baron, really, really powerful. And yet by this point, they also had a better winery. Lafite, by the way, interestingly, we're tasting it tonight. Lafite has just put out a tender for the same thing, an architectural competition to design a new winery for Lafite. And they did it at Pichon Baron and in 1986. Okay, wow, I think that is beautiful. That is brilliant. That is so poised and balanced, and again, so Pauillac. Wow, I love that wine. This is 1,600 euros in case in bond. So we're talking 1,000 less than the contest for a wine which is delicious. It maybe doesn't have quite the round depths of the content of the contest, sorry, but you're really getting a brilliant Pauillac. And I agree. What I really like about this wine is it surprises us now when we taste it, because it's been put down next to Pichon Contest for so long that we kind of forget. And so this is what I like about this wine. When you say rosy red fruit, so we've got this classic crème de cassis and, you know, really intense blackberry, blackcurrant puree, but we've also got little touches of red fruits that are fresher, that kind of bring the palate up, that pick things up. And this very, very, very beautiful aromatic nose with touches of floral. Wow, I think that's fantastic. And because it was backwards for so long, it's really lovely to see what's happening to it now. I do still get some tobacco. There's no question that we're in a slightly more, we're getting towards a more tertiary aromatic frame, but this is still young. Okay, blend. 80% Cabernet Sauvignon, so a little bit higher than the Pichon Comtesse, 15% Merlot, and 5% Cabernet Franc. The Pichon Comtesse, by the way, has a lot higher Cabernet Sauvignon than normal. It's a vintage which so favoured Cabernet Sauvignon that they put a lot more of it than normal into the Pichon Comtesse. One of the reasons why it was recognised as being so powerful and so impressive at the time. Pichon Baron always has more Cabernet Sauvignon in the blend because it has this brilliant outcrop directly opposite Latour, fantastic terroir, and it's very, very heavy, but in terms of very, not heavy, it's perfectly suited for Cabernet Sauvignon. So it always has a lot. And I've got to agree, tonight, this is the one out of the two that stands out. That is not always the case, but certainly for me tonight, it is. Love it. And I also have to tell you, and I totally have to give credit to Neil Martin for this, but he told me that Christian Seeley, the now director, who I'm sure you all know, the guy who always wears a bow tie, no matter what the time of year, no matter what. And he's told me a few times that he has thought about, he's come to work sometimes wearing a normal tie. And when tourists come or when visitors come, they're very upset if he's not wearing a bow tie. So now he just always wears a bow tie. But anyway, back to Neil. What I found out was, where does Christian Seeley buy his bow ties? Okay, and I'm going to type it down for you so you can all rush out and get them. Okay, he gets them from a place called Charvet in Place Vendôme in Paris. That's where he gets them all from. And I'm writing it down for you because I thought that was just such a brilliant piece of trivia for you. Okay, there we go. That is where Christian Seeley gets his bow ties. But in 1996, he was not making this utterly fabulous wine. That was Jean-Michel. And Lynch Barge is tasting absolutely knocking it out of the park, delicious. And so is the Pichon Baron. So I think I am going to write a little note to Jean-Michel tomorrow and tell him, congratulations, how enjoyable both of those wines are. Whew, okay, lots of fun stories about those two, but we're going to move on to the crescendo of our tasting. We have two first growths. I could definitely have picked Mouton as well because it's a outstanding, brilliant 1986, as we know, but so are these two, and they're at either edge. And also they're so different in terms of their character of Pauillac that I thought it'd be really fun for us to put the Lafite against the Latour. So who owned these two at the time? Lafite was owned by Baron Eric de Rothschild, and Latour was owned by Francois Pinault. So of course the Rothschilds are still there. The Rothschilds have been at Lafite since 1968. And Francois Pinault has been at Latour since 1993. There were quite a lot of changes happening at Latour at this time because he'd arrived in 1993, and then in 1996, with 3 years later, Frederick Engerer, who is today's CEO, president of Latour, he'd arrived, but he was the commercial director in 1996. He wasn't the president. He became president in, I think, 98. So at this point, he wasn't. And at this point as well, the winemaker, it's pretty interesting. Let me find his name. It's called Frederick Ardouin, was his name. Hang on, yes, correct. Frederick Ardouin was the winemaker. And a year or two after this, he left to join, what's it called? Chateau du Tertre. He left because there was really a wholesale change of the guard when Pinault arrived. So this is quite a nice window into old school Latour, I would say. It's just at the point where they'd started to really do a much better job of selection and really looking at their ground and working out what they should do in terms of which plots go into which wine. This was really one of the very first years where it wasn't certain that if the grapes were within the l'enclos, so if the grapes were within the wall, that they would definitely go into the first wine. But at this point, once Frederick arrived, they started to say, hang on, we've got to really taste each plot and see if it deserves to be in the first wine. So you're starting to get this greater concentration and precision that you absolutely have in today's Latour, but it was still pretty much with the old team. So really interesting to kind of see that change. This was also the year that John Calasser left Latour. So John Calasser, as you know, I'm sure, wonderful historians of Bordeaux, he was at Latour for a long time. And then when the Wertheimers, the Chanel brothers, tried to buy Latour and then lost out to Francois Pinault, they bought Raison Segler as a kind of consolation prize, but they took John Calasser with them, and it was in this year. So John Calasser going really kind of paved the way for Frederick to become the president. So we're right on the cusp of history here with this Latour. And wow, this is beautiful. This was again a wine which was closed down, knitted, really, really very powerful, but not very lovable when it was first out. Remember the soil. Always, always, always go back to the soil when you're trying to understand why a wine is the kind of personality, why it's acting the way it does. Just as with the Pichon Baron, you have this lovely gravel over a sticky clay, heavy clay. Latour, more than any other property in Pauillac, has this very, very particular, beautiful terroir, which is about 3 meters of gravel, and then this heavy, dense clay. The clay gives power, the gravel gives drainage. Together they make this kind of perfect combination, but they can be very dense and powerful when they're young, just as with the Pichon Baron. So both of them took their time. They, so they were kind of often a little underestimated in their youth. But now, 25 years, they're starting to show what they're about. Wow. This was 56% of the production in the first wine, and the blend, so similar to what we've seen so far, this is 78% Cabernet Sauvignon, 17% Merlot, 4% Cabernet Franc, and 1% Petit Verdot. Okay, now for here, I certainly get some mint notes straight away, straight off the first nose, but I also get olives. Here, I think I'm at the most concentrated of all of the wines I've had so far. It's the first time I've really had like a kind of black paste. Definitely a ton of the bilberries, the cassis, all of that kind of range of black fruits that you get in Pauillac. And I get roasted fruits here as well. This is really, really concentrated. Wow. Very powerful, very ripe, and kind of laser focused. That's a brilliant Latour. As it stays in my mouth, as it elongates, there I get more of the tobacco notes and the black truffle and the things that show me that it's in its tertiary phase or beginning to hit its tertiary phase. But this is a long, long, long way from reaching its real peak. And this is 13%. You get this beautiful balance, but tons of concentration, and it's only 13% alcohol. Gorgeous. So I would say that the 95 Latour is a better wine to drink probably today. The 95 Latour is a little bit more open. This is still, I would say, it's not backward at this point, but it's certainly still coiled. It's not quite ready. The 95 Latour is a little bit more open, at least the last time I had it, which I've got to say, it's not like I drink it every night, but I last had it probably 5 months ago. And that's what I would say. And yeah, I agree that olive and blackcurrant kind of mix where they're playing off each other is brilliant. So you guys, what was the price that you saw? 5,800. Yeah, that's what I saw. I saw 6,000 in bond for a case of 12. And the Lafite is a little bit more, 9,000. We'll see which one does better. Can't wait to find out. I think this was Andrew Jefford, who said, Latour, the gift of sub-gravel clays. Very, very nice. How long are we supposed to keep these bloody things? I could not agree more, Alistair. But let's face it, we're having a lot of pleasure from this. If we had to be forced to drink the whole bottle tonight, I don't think we'd complain. You just got to make sure that you put it for a long time into a carafe and open it up. That's amazing. And yeah, you're right, the 82, which of course I do not have in my cellar, but the 82 is still going strong. Just when you think it won't, you know, they do. Particularly, I would say the Mouton 82, still very, very much going strong. Love, love, love that wine. Smoke on the finish as it opens up. You always get more smoke as a wine opens up, where it's just really starting to kind of, just kind of, I don't know, just become a bit more seductive. You get that little kind of flash of smoke. I think we should all be glad that when the first growers deliver, it makes it all worthwhile, doesn't it, when they deliver. And I read something really interesting as well about Pinot. So when Endura arrived, he really rewrote a lot of the rules of Bordeaux, which for a long time was very much a gentleman's club, old school, and particularly the first growth was seen as leading the way, but also respecting the system. When Endura arrived, he kind of cut through a lot of the traditions and wasn't afraid to. You saw how many people left Latour at that time, how many of the old team left. Now, in many countries, that would be normal. It's not that normal in France because it's not easy to fire people in France. You tend to have, you know, certainly in those days, you had, most people stayed in first growth for generations. When Endura arrived, and he changed so many things, it was really quite a shock. And I read this really interesting article that was written about an interview with him. It was in 2007. And he was talking about Francois Pinot, so the owner, who obviously owns Kering, so a luxury goods house, you name it, Gucci, you name the luxury goods, it's pretty much owned by him or Arnaud. And Andrew was saying, I'm just going to read it to you, it's so interesting. He said, he pushes you to be as good as you can be, as good as you possibly can be. These are the questions he asks. What are you afraid of? Why don't you do that? What is stopping you? And then he said, he liberates a lot of energy. I really, really liked that. He liberates a lot of energy. And it made me really think about Endura and how when he arrived at Latour, he absolutely liberated a lot of energy at Latour. And he managed to reinvent what this wine could be and the focus that was there and the real energy in the glass. And yes, I agree with you. It's very, very rare to find an off vintage. One of the reasons is because you have this detail-orientated obsessive at the head, which is Endura, but also it's because of this incredible terroir that Latour is so lucky to have. It's one of the reasons that if you're thinking forward in the heat of summers nowadays, and how are the great wines of Bordeaux going to adapt to climate change, Latour is one of the best placed for that because it has this mix of gravel plus clay. So you get water retention, you get the power and the freshness. And we're really getting that here. So brilliant, brilliant Latour. Okay, now let's see. So Lafite was absolutely seen as one of the wines of the vintage. The Pichon Comtesse and the Lafite Rothschild and the Mouton were seen as being wines of the vintage at the time. So let's see how it's doing. Okay, I'm excited. The last time I had this 1996 Lafite, I did freaking love it. It was brilliant. And I kept it to the end. I nearly put Latour last, but I thought, Lafite really, usually, whenever I've tasted it, has been amazing. And the color here, we straight away saw, was the deepest. The most depth of all of these wines is in the Lafite. Okay, the dream team, the guys at the time, Baron Eric, Christophe Salin, Charles Chevalier, those three worked together for decades, making brilliant, brilliant wines, hit after hit after hit, but usually in a more understated fashion than Latour. The thing about Lafite in this vintage particularly, it was known right off for its power. It was known right from the beginning, slightly uncharacteristic power for Lafite. The blend for the Latour, 78 Cab Sauvignon, 17 Merlot, 4 Cabernet Franc, and 1 Petit Verdot. Okay, the Lafite blend, 83 Cabernet Sauvignon, 7 Cabernet Franc, 7 Merlot, and 3 Petit Verdot. So a little bit more Petit Verdot and a little bit more Cabernet Sauvignon than the Latour. Okay, let's see. So this is a 100-point wine several times over from several different people. Okay, seen as being really up there with the 86 and the 82. Wow, okay. I get an inkier feel here than I've got in the others, not just in the color, but I get this kind of earthy, inky, rich licorice note. And then this very, very, very smooth tannic frame that just keeps on going, really, really, really elongates. It's an incredibly classy wine. And this is a wine which, as I say, when it was young, it was really, really more powerful than a normal Lafite would be. But now, 25 years, it's starting to turn into a Lafite, because what I mean by that is you're starting to see the fineness of the tannins. You're starting to see this really elegant, fine frame. And that's what Lafite does so well. And it's why Lafite will power through. So I am certainly hugely impressed by that Latour. And I think it's so difficult to say which one of those wines is better. Certainly, who knows? Tasting better tonight, a different question. But what I really get here with this Lafite is cashmere, silky tannins. It's so elegant. And that's what's interesting about that is that's an evolution, because if we were tasting this 10 years ago, you'd actually have a much more kind of brute, big shouldered Lafite, which would taste almost more like a Latour. But now it's kind of pushing off, following its own ploughing its own farrow and going to being a Lafite. Or do you plough a furrow or a farrow? Somebody tell me. Okay. That is freaking brilliant. Okay, 38% of the production in this first wine, which again, thank you, furrow, which again is quite unusual for Lafite at the time. So you remember Latour was 53% first wine. Normally, that would be the other way around. In the 1990s, Lafite tended to make a lot more first wine. But this vintage, this power, it had low yields naturally. They were really concentrating on picking out this high Cabernet Sauvignon, and only 38% went into the first wine. It's muscular still, but we get this licorice, we get this real mineral sense of kind of just little pulses of electricity on the close of play here. And that is a reflection of how this is different from the Latour. You have very, very deep gravels. The deepest gravels in Pauillac are here at Lafite, right up to 9 meters of gravel. And what that means is aromatic complexity and finesse, and this incredible ability to age just in a stately way. So we don't need to worry about this. This wine is delicious now, really open and gorgeous, but this will still taste like this if we came back in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years time. It is in many ways, for me, the essence of the 1996 vintage, certainly the essence of a great Pauillac, and it's fantastic. And yeah, this is a very happy evening we can all spend, if we can really eke them out, of deciding whether we prefer the Latour or the Lafite. And look, it's 8 o'clock. I always do this. I never give the 15 minutes we're supposed to have at the end. I'm so sorry. But you've been asking questions as we've gone along. I hope I've really enjoyed chatting to you all about these wines. I think, Ronan, let's get up let's see which one we all prefer.
Okay, Cecilia, do we have a poll?
We have a poll. Yes, Cecilia, you have got the poll. Thank you. I would say this is the hardest poll I have done in all of the different tastings. And I guess there's a question of absolute quality. There's also a question of value. Because value, it's pretty hard to beat the Sauzet de Mallet, which we'll all have forgotten about, but it was delicious. Okay, let's see how we did. Oh, that's nice. I think that's a fair result, actually, don't you? An even heat for Latour and Lafite. I think that is, yeah, I would agree. My two, it's a fix. My two would definitely, I think, would be between the feet and the toe. And then I had a soft spot for the lynch-barge, actually. I thought the lynch-barge was tasting delicious. And the Baron. But yeah, it was hard. This was a very,
Jane.
that was the hardest one ever because they all tasted great. Okay, that was brilliant, everybody. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm with you, Paul. We want to recount with a new set of samples. If 67 could just sort that out for us. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you. Have a good rest of your evening, everyone.
Thank you very much, Jane. Good night, everyone.
See you soon. Bye. Bye.